An engine naturally takes in air from the atmosphere to burn the fuel with oxygen. If you're looking to give your car a boost, a supercharger compresses air and force feeds it into the engine. The increased mass of oxygen burns more fuel, giving the engine more power. A supercharger is particularly popular in drag car racing. It attaches with a belt to the engine's crankshaft, and voila, the car's on steroids. They begin with a plate that forms the rear of the supercharger's aluminum housing. Using a press that applies several tons of pressure, they install 2 steel ball bearings. These will enable the supercharger's 2 rotors to spin, which is what compresses air and forces it into the engine. After bolting a steel cap over each bearing, workers insert steel dowels into holes along the perimeter of the plate. These dowels, which they now fully seat with the press, will align with receiving holes on the adjoining housings. They take the plate that forms the front end of the housing and press a steel ball bearing into it. This bearing will enable the supercharger's input shaft to rotate, and by doing so, spin the rotors. They press a rubber lip seal on top of the bearing to keep oil in and dirt out. Next, they apply a retaining clip to hold the seal in position. Using the press, they seat the clip in its groove. Next, they insert the input shaft. Its flanged end will protrude out of the supercharger, where a belt and pulley will rotate it so that it turns gears which spin the rotors. A computer-guided mill machines each rotor out of extruded aluminum. Once both rotors are ready, workers take the central section of the supercharger housing and apply sealant to one end of it. They affix the rear plate containing the 2 bearings for the rotors. They secure the plate to the main housing using socket-headed screws, which they tighten with an air driver. Flipping the housing to the other side now, they install the first of the 2 rotors, inserting its shaft into the first bearing in the just attached rear plate. Then they install the second rotor, inserting its shaft into the second bearing in the plate. The second rotor lies perpendicular to the first. This positioning allows the spinning rotors to capture air at the top of the housing, compress it, and force it downward to the bottom of the housing. They close up the housing with another plate, which also contains bearings for the rotor shafts. However, on this end, the shafts protrude beyond the bearings in order to receive gears. Then to this, they'll attach the housing containing the input shaft, which, driven by the belt and pulley, rotates these gears to spin the rotors. Before continuing further, the team puts the supercharger through a performance test. The machine, called a dynamometer, assesses the ratio of speed to airflow to ensure the rotors are compressing air the way they should be, and therefore outputting the required boost. If the rotors pass the test with flying colors, workers then hand polish the aluminum housing to a shiny finish. A key component in the supercharger is a feeler gauge, that fan-shaped part shown on the lower left. It ensures that the distance between the rotors is correct, which is critical, because if the rotors are too far apart, they don't compress air adequately, and if they're too close together, they jam. It's the customer who, when installing the supercharger, attaches a pulley to the end of the input shaft, then a belt onto the pulley. The other end of the belt loops around the car engine's crankshaft pulley, connecting the supercharger to the engine for a mega boost of power.